London, May 1818. The chandeliers of Grosvenor House cast their golden glow across a sea of silk and jewels, illuminating a world where youth and beauty reigned supreme, and where women past the age of 5 and 20 were quietly relegated to the shadows. Miss Prudence Bellamy stood in precisely such a shadow, her dove grey gown chosen specifically to blend with the wallpaper, her posture perfect from years of making herself unobtrusive. At 35 years of age, she had long since accepted that her purpose was to fade into the background, to anticipate needs before they were voiced, to exist as extension rather than entity. The ballroom air grew thick with perfume and body heat, the orchestra's strings weaving through conversations that rose and fell like waves against shore. Prudence felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the sensation of walls closing in despite the cavernous space. 12 seasons she had endured as a hopeful debutante, watching younger girls secure matches while she remained perpetually overlooked. Now, as Lady Fairmont's companion, she had found a different kind of peace in her invisibility. But tonight, something felt different. Perhaps it was the oppressive heat, or the way Lady Vivian Ashcroft's cruel laugh carried across the room as she surveyed the unmarried women with predatory assessment. Whatever the cause, Prudence found herself edging toward the terrace doors, seeking the garden that promised cool air and blessed solitude. If stories of invisible women finding unexpected love touch your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You will not want to miss what happens next. She slipped through the doors unnoticed, as she did most things, and followed the stone path toward the conservatory at the garden's far end. The winter garden, Lady Grosvenor called it, filled with exotic plants that thrived in glass-enclosed warmth even as spring flowers bloomed outside. Prudence had discovered it during her first visit to Grosvenor House 3 years prior, and it had become her refuge during these endless social obligations. The conservatory door yielded to her touch, and she stepped into the close, warm darkness. The candles had not been lit, leaving only moonlight filtering through glass panes to illuminate the jungle of leaves and vines. Perfect. She could breathe here, could drop the careful mask of pleasant invisibility she wore like armor. Prudence moved deeper into the space, trailing her fingers along the rough bark of a potted orange tree, inhaling the sweet perfume of night-blooming jasmine. She had studied botany extensively during her long spinsterhood, finding solace in the honest beauty of plants that did not judge her unmarried state or advancing years. It was then that she heard the exhale, a sound of profound weariness that echoed her own feelings precisely. Her heart leaped into her throat. She was not alone. Someone stood in the far corner, barely visible as a darker shadow among the foliage. A man, judging by the height and breadth of the silhouette. "Forgive me," she said softly, already turning to leave. "I did not realize anyone else sought sanctuary here." "Please," the voice replied, cultured and deep with an undercurrent of exhaustion she recognized. "Do not leave on my account. I suspect we are refugees from the same battlefield, seeking the same peace." Something in his tone made her pause, not the flirtation she might have expected, nor the dismissal she usually received. Simply honest acknowledgement of shared weariness. "The ballroom does become rather oppressive," Prudence ventured, staying near the door but not departing, "particularly when one has endured too many seasons of the same performances." "Performances," he repeated, and she heard grim amusement in the word. "Yes, that is precisely what they are. Every smile calculated, every word weighed for advantage. I wonder if anyone in that room speaks a single honest sentence this entire evening." Prudence found herself drawn further into the conservatory, curiosity overcoming caution. In the darkness they were equals, merely two tired souls seeking respite. He could not see her plain features, her faded gown, the silver beginning to thread through her dark hair. And she could not see whatever face he wore, whatever judgment it might hold. "I wonder if honesty is a luxury the marriage market cannot afford," she said, stopping near a display of orchids she had admired on previous visits. "Truth might interfere with the carefully constructed illusions that make such transactions possible." "Transactions," he said, moving slightly. Glass clinked softly as he set down what must have been a drink. "You speak as one who has observed the process closely." "I have had considerable opportunity for observation," Prudence replied, surprised by her own candor. Something about the darkness made confession easier, as if the shadows absolved her of consequence. 12 years of being observed in turn, found wanting, and relegated to the role of observer rather than participant. She expected polite generalities, the automatic reassurances people offered when confronted with uncomfortable truths. Instead, he made a thoughtful sound. 12 years, he said quietly. That is a considerable education in human nature. I wonder what you concluded from such extensive study. No one had ever asked her that, not in 17 years of invisibility. Prudence felt something shift in her chest, a small crack in the careful wall she had built. I concluded that people rarely see what is actually before them, she said, moving to examine the orchids more closely, though she could barely see them in the dim light. They see what they wish to see, or what they fear to see, or what society tells them they should see. True observation requires vulnerability that most find too costly. Vulnerability, he repeated, and she heard him move closer, though he maintained respectful distance. You suggest that genuine seeing is an act of courage. Is it not? Prudence touched the velvet petal of a moth orchid, feeling its impossible softness. To truly see another person, you must acknowledge they are as complex and worthy as yourself, that their invisible struggles might mirror your own. Most find it easier to reduce others to simple categories, beautiful or plain, useful or useless, marriageable or unmarriageable. And into which category were you reduced? He asked, his voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than pity. The useful sort, Prudence replied, surprised by how little bitterness she felt stating it. I keep Lady Fairmont's accounts, manage her correspondence, remember the names and scandals of everyone we encounter. I am valuable precisely because I am not seen. Visibility would interfere with my function. The silence that followed felt weighted, as if he were truly considering her words rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. When he finally responded, his voice carried new intensity. What a profound waste, he said, and she heard anger beneath the words, though not directed at her. To reduce a person capable of such insight to mere function, to value the skill of invisibility over the mind that creates it. Prudence's breath caught. In 17 years, no one had suggested her invisibility might be anything other than natural consequence of her limitations. The idea that it was waste, that something valuable had been lost, struck her with unexpected force. You are kind to say so, she managed, though her voice wavered. Though you speak from the generous safety of not seeing me, in proper light you would understand why my utility is considered the best use of my particular qualities. Would I? He challenged, moving closer still. I have spent 2 years being told that my best use is to provide an heir, to perpetuate a line, that my own wishes, my need for intellectual partnership, my desire for genuine conversation are luxuries I cannot afford. I begin to suspect that society wastes all of us in different ways, reducing us to our most basic functions while ignoring what makes us human. The stark candor in his confession made Prudence's chest ache. This was no idle party conversation, no flirtation or social maneuvering. This was truth, shared in darkness by two people tired of pretending. The deep detachment in his voice hinted at the emotional coldness of his previous life. You are widowed, she said softly, not a question, but recognition. 2 years ago, he confirmed. A marriage of duty that brought neither of us happiness. She wanted position and jewels. I wanted heirs and political alliance. We gave each other those things with admirable efficiency, and not one moment of genuine connection. She died in childbed with our stillborn son, and I find I cannot mourn either the life we might have built or the child we never knew. The confession was devastating in its honesty. Prudence moved closer without conscious decision, drawn by shared understanding of isolation within expected roles. I am sorry, she said, and meant it. Not for your lack of mourning, which sounds like honest assessment rather than cruelty, but for those years of living beside someone without ever truly meeting them. Yes, he said, and she heard relief in the single word. That is precisely it. We lived as strangers sharing a house, performing our respective roles to society's satisfaction and our own despair. Now I am expected to repeat the process, to select another stranger and hope this time I successfully produce the required heir before one of us expires from loneliness. Prudence laughed, a genuine sound she had not made in months. That may be the bleakest description of remarriage I have ever heard. "Am I wrong?" he asked, and she heard answering humor beneath the darkness. "No," she admitted. "You are merely more honest than most dare to be, though I wonder if honesty serves you well in your current endeavor. Debutantes seeking advantageous marriages might find your perspective rather discouraging." "Let them be discouraged," he said with feeling. "I have endured 6 weeks of the most vapid conversations known to man. Every young lady perfectly accomplished in saying absolutely nothing of substance. They recite poetry without understanding it, discuss weather as if it were fascinating, and respond to every attempt at genuine discourse with carefully practiced blankness designed to showcase their malleability. They have been trained to provide blank canvases upon which you might project your desires," Prudence said, recognizing the familiar pattern. "To have opinions would be to risk disagreement. To show intelligence might threaten fragile masculine pride. Better to be beautiful and empty than complex and unmarriageable." "How have you remained unmarried with such wit?" he demanded, genuine confusion in his voice. "Any sensible man would value conversation with you above a dozen empty beauties." "Sensible men are in remarkably short supply," Prudence said dryly, "and wit in women past the first bloom of youth is generally considered threatening rather than appealing. Men want beauty at 20, not insight at 35. "Then men are fools," he declared, and she heard him moving closer through the darkness. "Though I begin to suspect I am the greatest fool, for I have been conversing with you for what must be an hour, and I do not even know your name." Prudence's heart clenched. In the darkness they had been equals. In the light he would see her properly, would understand that she was precisely the sort of woman sensible men overlooked. The spell would break, and she would return to being invisible Miss Bellamy, useful companion, permanent spinster. But before she could respond, the conservatory door opened, flooding the space with light and sound from the ballroom. They both turned sharply, and in the sudden illumination, Prudence saw his face clearly for the first time. William Cartwright, Marquess of Aldridge. One of the most eligible widowers in England, possessed of both fortune and remarkable good looks that made him prey to every ambitious mother in London. She had seen him from afar at countless events, always surrounded by beautiful young women competing for his attention. And she had just spent an hour talking to him as an equal, believing him an ordinary man seeking ordinary refuge. Horror flooded through her. He would think she had known, had orchestrated this meeting, was yet another fortune hunter employing different tactics. Before he could see her face clearly in the shifting light, before recognition and disappointment could cloud his expression, Prudence fled. She pushed past the startled couple at the door, barely registering their shocked faces, as she hurried along the garden path toward the safety of the ballroom and the blessed obscurity of the wallflower corner. Behind her she heard him call out, but she did not stop, could not. Her flight was an attempt to avoid the immediate and devastating social shame of being suspected of such manipulative design, especially when she had just experienced the most genuine conversation of her adult life with a man who could never see her as anything other than failed debutante turned useful spinster. The ballroom swallowed her into its familiar embrace. She found Lady Fairmont precisely where she had left her, holding court with her usual circle of wealthy widows. Prudence slipped into position slightly behind and to the left of her employer, resuming her customary post as if she had never left. Her heart pounded traitorously in her chest. Her hands trembled as she adjusted Lady Fairmont's shawl without being asked, performing the invisible services that defined her existence. But her mind remained in that dark conservatory, replaying every word of their conversation, mourning the loss of something she had never truly possessed. What she did not know, could not have known as she struggled to compose herself, was that William Cartwright had seen her face in the light, had recognized her from half a dozen balls where she had stood in shadows, unnoticed by everyone including himself until this moment. And instead of disappointment, instead of the dismissal she feared, he felt only one thing: profound regret that he had been blind for so long. 2 years and the courtship scandal. The rest of the evening passed in a blur for Prudence. She performed her duties automatically, fetching refreshments, remembering names, maintaining Lady Fairmont's social schedule without conscious thought. But every moment she remained painfully aware of the conservatory at the garden's edge, of the conversation that had felt like water to someone dying of thirst. Lady Fairmont, perceptive in the way of women who had survived 70 years of society's machinations, noticed the change in her companion. "You disappeared," she said during a lull in visitors, her sharp eyes studying Prudence with concern. "And you returned rather flustered. I trust nothing untoward occurred." "Nothing untoward," Prudence assured her, grateful for the dim lighting that hid her heightened color. "I simply sought air in the conservatory. The crush was rather overwhelming." Lady Fairmont said, clearly unconvinced but willing to let the matter rest. "The Aldridge heir has been circling the room like a fox in a henhouse. Every mother with an unmarried daughter has been throwing their chicks in his path with increasing desperation." Prudence's fingers tightened on her fan. "I notice the Marquess appears much sought after this season." "Sought after and increasingly irritable," Lady Fairmont observed with satisfaction. "I watched him dance with the Sinclair girl, who is widely considered this season's diamond. He looked ready to expire from boredom. The girl simpered and giggled, but said nothing of substance for the entire set." "Perhaps he prefers ladies of quieter disposition," Prudence suggested, struggling to keep her voice neutral. "The man needs a partner, not a decoration," Lady Fairmont declared, tapping her fan against her palm for emphasis. "His first wife was a lovely creature with all the depth of a puddle. Poor thing died trying to give him an heir, and rumor suggests neither of them was particularly grieved by the lack of genuine affection between them. One would think he might look for something different this time." Prudence said nothing, but Lady Fairmont's words echoed the very sentiments William had expressed in the darkness. The knowledge that she had correctly identified his frustration, his longing for substance over surface, sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. They departed Grosvenor House shortly after midnight, Lady Fairmont declaring herself satisfied with the evening's social harvest. As their carriage rolled through London's darkened streets, Prudence stared out at the passing shadows and allowed herself to wonder, just for a moment, what might have happened if she had not fled. If she had stayed, allowed him to see her clearly, risked the inevitable disappointment when he realized she was merely the invisible companion he had overlooked at countless previous events. But such wondering was foolish. William Cartwright inhabited a world of youth and beauty, of political alliances and advantageous marriages. She was 35 years old, plain, useful, and utterly unsuitable for a Marquess requiring an heir. Their conversation had been a beautiful aberration, a moment outside normal rules. Tomorrow it would fade like morning mist, and they would return to their assigned positions in society's rigid structure. What Prudence did not know, as she retired to her small but comfortable room in Lady Fairmont's townhouse, was that William Cartwright was at that very moment interrogating every servant at Grosvenor House, determined to learn the identity of the woman who had given him the first honest conversation he had experienced in years, a woman whose intelligence and insight had made the prospect of yet another society marriage suddenly unbearably intolerable. The morning brought an unexpected development. Prudence was reviewing Lady Fairmont's correspondence in the small study off the drawing room when their butler delivered a card on a silver salver. "The Marquess of Aldridge requests the honor of calling upon Lady Fairmont," the butler intoned with barely suppressed excitement. "He awaits in the drawing room." Prudence's heart stopped, then started again with painful intensity. There was no reason for the Marquess to call upon Lady Fairmont. They were barely acquainted, moving in adjacent but not overlapping circles, unless he had somehow discovered her identity, unless he sought her out, unless the previous evening had meant something beyond polite conversation to a stranger. No, she crushed that hope ruthlessly. More likely he sought introduction to one of Lady Fairmont's extensive social connections. Or perhaps he required advice from a respected society matron about navigating the marriage market. Any number of perfectly logical reasons that had nothing to do with a plain spinster companion. "Tell the Marquess I shall receive him directly," Lady Fairmont called from her bedchamber, where her maid was completing the final touches of her morning toilette. "Prudence, do go down and entertain him until I arrive. You know I cannot abide leaving guests unattended." Prudence's hands went cold. She could not face him, could not endure the moment when recognition struck, when he realized the invisible companion had been his mysterious conversationalist. Could not watch understanding dawn, followed by inevitable disappointment, or worse, pity. "Perhaps I should assist with your dressing instead," she suggested desperately. "The green walking dress might be more appropriate for morning calls than the blue." "Nonsense, you already selected my attire perfectly," Lady Fairmont replied, emerging from her chamber with the serene confidence of a woman secure in her social position. "Go now, child. The Marquess should not be kept waiting. Make polite conversation until I join you." There was no escape. Prudence descended the stairs with the slow inevitability of someone walking to execution, each step bringing her closer to the moment when the previous evening's magic would shatter against the harsh light of day. She paused at the drawing-room door, drawing a steadying breath, then entered with the practiced composure of someone who had perfected the art of invisibility. William Cartwright stood by the window, studying the modest garden beyond, with his back to the door. Even in simple morning attire, he commanded presence in a way that made the comfortable room seem suddenly small. When he turned at her entrance, his face held an expression she could not quite read. Recognition. Definitely recognition, but not disappointment. Something else, something that looked almost like relief mixed with determination. "Miss Bellamy," he said, and his voice carried the same warmth it had held in darkness. "I am pleased to make your acquaintance properly. Though I feel I already know you rather well from our conversation in the conservatory." Prudence's careful composure fractured. He was not pretending it had not happened, was not allowing her to retreat into invisibility. He was acknowledging it directly, openly, as if their connection had been real rather than illusory. "My lord," she managed, executing a perfect curtsy to buy herself time to think. "Lady Fairmont will join us shortly. May I offer you refreshment while you wait?" "I came to see you," he said simply, moving closer but maintaining respectful distance, "though I did not realize when I inquired after the companion of Lady Fairmont that you would turn out to be the mysterious woman from last evening. That is a remarkable coincidence." "Or perfect irony," Prudence replied before she could stop herself. The invisible companion conversing with a Marquess in darkness, each unaware of the other's identity, like something from a Gothic novel. His lips quirked in genuine amusement. "I was thinking more of a philosophical thought experiment. Two people meeting without the distortions of rank or appearance, discovering genuine connection based purely on minds meeting. What Plato might have proposed if he wrote romance, rather than dialogues." The fact that he referenced Plato in a drawing-room conversation made something in Prudence's chest squeeze painfully. This could not be real. Men like William Cartwright did not pursue conversations about philosophy with spinster companions. They certainly did not call upon them the morning after a chance encounter. "Why are you here?" she asked, abandoning pretense for the honesty their first meeting had established. "We spoke in darkness for an hour. You know nothing about me beyond what I revealed in unguarded conversation, and what you have now seen in daylight must confirm that I am precisely the sort of woman society has taught you to overlook." His expression shifted, his features set in a grim line. Not at her, she realized, but at the statement itself. "Society has taught me a great many things," he said quietly, moving to stand before her with deliberate intent. "Most of them lies designed to perpetuate systems that serve very few people well. I was taught that beauty matters more than character, that youth is preferable to experience, that women should be seen and not heard, and that genuine intellectual partnership is a luxury rather than a necessity. Last night, speaking with you, I remembered that every one of those teachings is absolute rubbish." Prudence could not speak, could not breathe. No one had ever looked at her the way he was looking at her now, as if she were valuable, worthy, seen. "Miss Bellamy," he continued, his voice gaining intensity, "I have spent 6 weeks being introduced to every eligible young lady in London. I have danced with diamonds of the first water. I have conversed with accomplished musicians, talented painters, and ladies who speak flawless French. Not one of them has given me a fraction of the genuine connection I experienced in 1 hour with you. Not one has spoken to me as a person rather than a title. Not one has made me remember why human beings seek partnership in the first place. You need an heir, Prudence said, the words escaping before wisdom could stop them. I am 35 years old. That is rather advanced for successful childbearing. My mother bore healthy children until she was 42, William replied calmly. And I have 3 younger brothers who can inherit if I die without issue. The succession is hardly in danger. What is in danger is my sanity, if I am forced to endure another season of vapid conversations with women who have been trained to be ornamental rather than human. The drawing room door opened, admitting Lady Fairmont with her characteristic precise timing. She took in the scene with one comprehensive glance, the Marquess standing perhaps closer to her companion than strict propriety allowed. Prudence's heightened colour, the charged atmosphere that spoke of conversation far beyond polite morning pleasantries. Lord Aldridge, she said smoothly, settling into her favourite chair with the air of a general taking command. What an unexpected pleasure. I confess I was surprised to receive your card, as I did not think we were well enough acquainted to warrant morning calls. William executed a perfect bow, transitioning seamlessly from intensity to social grace. Lady Fairmont, I hope you will forgive the presumption, but I find myself in need of advice regarding a matter of some delicacy. Indeed, Lady Fairmont's eyes gleamed with interest. I am always pleased to offer counsel, though I wonder what matter could drive a Marquess to my modest drawing room. I wish to court your companion, William said boldly, abandoning all pretense. With your permission and her consent. I realize this is highly irregular, but I find I have no patience left for the usual social maneuvering. Lady Fairmont's eyebrows rose to her hairline. Prudence felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. This could not be happening. Marquesses did not court spinster companions. They married debutantes, created alliances, secured successions. They did not pursue women who had been overlooked for 17 years. Court Prudence, Lady Fairmont repeated slowly, as if testing the words for hidden meaning. May I ask what has prompted this extraordinary request? Last evening at Grosvenor House, I had the pleasure of conversing with Miss Bellamy in the conservatory, William explained, his gaze never leaving Prudence's face. We spoke for approximately an hour about topics ranging from botany to social criticism. It was the most genuine conversation I have experienced in longer than I care to admit. When she fled before I could properly identify her, I spent the remainder of the evening discovering her name and direction. I am here because I believe Miss Bellamy possesses every quality I have been seeking in a partner, and I would be a fool to allow social convention to prevent me from pursuing that connection. The silence that followed felt weighted, as if the entire universe held its breath waiting for Lady Fairmont's response. Prudence stood frozen, incapable of speech or movement, torn between desperate hope and certain knowledge that this was madness. Lady Fairmont studied them both with the sharp assessment of someone who had survived 70 years by reading people accurately. Finally she spoke. Prudence, she said gently, you must make your own decision in this matter. But I will tell you what I observe. I see a man who has come here directly, honestly, without the usual games and machinations that characterize courtship in our world. I see someone who values your mind enough to risk social ridicule by pursuing a woman society has dismissed. And I see you, my dear, looking more alive than I have seen you in the 3 years you have been in my service. Whatever you decide, know that you have my support and my home for as long as you require them. The kindness in her employer's words nearly undid Prudence completely. She had expected dismissal, had braced for the moment when her usefulness would be outweighed by scandal. Instead, Lady Fairmont offered support, validation, choice. She turned to William, studying his face properly for the first time in full daylight. He was handsome, yes, with strong features and eyes that held both intelligence and genuine warmth. But more than that, he was looking at her as no one had looked at her in 17 years, as if she mattered, as if she were worth pursuing, worth knowing, worth valuing. Why, she whispered, the question encompassing everything she could not articulate. Why me? Why now? Why risk everything for someone society has deemed worthless? Because you are real, William said simply. In a world of performances and pretense, you spoke truth. You saw me as a person rather than a title. You challenged my thinking, engaged my mind, made me remember what genuine human connection feels like. I cannot go back to shallow conversations and strategic marriages after experiencing what authentic partnership might offer. I will not. Prudence felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back furiously, unwilling to add crying to the list of inappropriate behaviors she was currently displaying. "I am not what you need," she said, making one last attempt at rationality. "You require a wife who can navigate society, who can provide heirs, who can enhance your political alliances. I am a spinster companion with no connections, no fortune, and advancing years. I would be a liability, not an asset." "You are precisely what I need," William countered, taking a step closer. "I need someone who will tell me truth rather than what I wish to hear. Someone who understands the cost of invisibility and the value of genuine recognition. Someone whose mind is as remarkable as their character. Furthermore, a clear-sighted partner will benefit my political responsibilities and the management of my estate. Everything else is negotiable." "The ton will crucify you," Prudence warned, even as hope began to kindle despite her best efforts to extinguish it. "Lady Vivian Ashcroft alone could destroy your reputation with whispers about your judgment, your desperation, your inexplicable choice." "Let them whisper," William said with sudden fierce intensity. "I have spent 40 years living according to their expectations, and it has brought me nothing but misery. If pursuing genuine happiness costs me the respect of my political allies, I consider that a remarkably favorable exchange." Lady Fairmont made a small sound that might have been approval or amusement. Prudence looked at her, seeking guidance, finding only warm encouragement. "What say you, child?" Lady Fairmont asked softly. "Will you allow the Marquess to court you, or will you send him away to continue his search among the empty-headed debutantes?" Prudence drew a shaking breath. Every instinct screamed that this was madness, that hope was dangerous, that allowing herself to believe would only make the inevitable disappointment more devastating. But beneath that fear, something else stirred. Something that had been dormant for 17 years. The memory of what it felt like to be seen. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, you may court me, my lord. Though I reserve the right to end this arrangement the moment you realize you have made a terrible mistake." "Fair enough," William said, and his smile transformed his entire face from handsome to radiant. "Though I suspect you will be waiting a very long time for that realization to occur." Lady Fairmont clapped her hands together with satisfaction. "Excellent. Then shall we discuss the terms of this courtship? I assume you wish to proceed in a manner that protects Prudence's reputation while allowing you to become better acquainted." What followed was the most unusual courtship negotiation London society had seen in decades. Lady Fairmont, acting as both protector and facilitator, established rules that bent convention without breaking it. William could call daily, but visits must not exceed 2 hours. They could attend public events together with proper chaperoning. Correspondence was permitted, though Lady Fairmont reserved the right to review letters if propriety demanded. Through it all, Prudence sat in stunned silence, watching her life transform from monotonous invisibility to something she had never dared imagine. When William finally departed, extracting a promise that he could call again that very afternoon, she remained motionless until the front door closed behind him. "Well," Lady Fairmont said into the silence, "that was certainly more excitement than I anticipated for a Tuesday morning." Prudence turned to her employer, with tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "He will change his mind," she said, voicing her deepest fear. "When he sees me properly in society, when he remembers what he could have instead, when the novelty of our conversation fades." "Perhaps," Lady Fairmont agreed, shocking her by not offering false reassurance. "Men are often fickle creatures who mistake momentary fascination for genuine feeling. But Prudence, my dear, I have lived 70 years and seen many courtships. What I witnessed just now was not a man pursuing novelty. It was someone who has been drowning finally finding air. Whether that lasts only time will tell, but you owe it to yourself to discover which it is. I, for one, am quite weary of seeing worthwhile women crushed by convention." The afternoon brought William's return exactly as promised, carrying a leather-bound volume that he presented to Prudence with boyish enthusiasm. "I brought you this," he said, as they settled in the drawing room with Lady Fairmont serving as chaperone. "It is a botanical treatise on orchid cultivation that was published last year. I recalled you mentioned studying botany, and I thought you might enjoy it." Prudence took the book with trembling hands, running her fingers over the tooled leather binding. It was expensive, clearly chosen with care, rather than grabbed hastily from the nearest bookshop. He had remembered their conversation, had thought of her, had selected something that spoke to her interests rather than generic romantic offerings. "Thank you," she managed, throat tight with emotion. "I have been wanting to read this particular work, but could not justify the expense." "Then I am doubly pleased to give it to you," William said, settling into the chair across from her with the easy comfort of someone who belonged. "Perhaps we might discuss it once you have had opportunity to read. I confess I know little about orchids beyond admiring their beauty, but I am curious to learn." They spoke for 2 hours, conversation flowing as easily as it had in darkness. Lady Fairmont, veteran of countless tedious social calls, found herself genuinely entertained by their discussion of everything from plant propagation to the philosophical implications of Darwin's recent work on evolution. When William reluctantly took his leave, citing appointments he could not postpone, he extracted a promise that Prudence would ride with him in Hyde Park the following morning. "At the promenade hour?" she asked doubtfully. "My lord, that is when all of society parades through the park. Surely you would prefer a less public venue for our outings." "I would prefer," William said firmly, "that society becomes accustomed to seeing us together as quickly as possible. There will be talk regardless. Better to face it directly than to skulk about as if we have something to hide." It was a relief to return to the quiet of the drawing room after he departed. Lady Fairmont studied her companion with an expression Prudence could not quite read. "He is either remarkably brave or utterly mad," the older woman observed. "Possibly both. You do realize that parading through Hyde Park at the fashionable hour with a spinster companion will create the scandal of the season." "I'm aware," Prudence said quietly, "which is why I intend to release him from this courtship before it goes further. He does not understand what he is risking. His reputation, his political alliances, his ability to make an advantageous match should he come to his senses." "And what are you risking?" Lady Fairmont asked shrewdly. "Beyond your heart, which I suspect is already more engaged than you wish to admit." Prudence had no answer to that because the truth was too painful to voice. She was risking the return to invisibility after experiencing what it felt like to be seen. She was risking hope after years of careful hopelessness. She was risking everything she had built to protect herself from precisely this sort of pain. But the following morning, when William arrived with an elegant barouche and an expression of such genuine pleasure at seeing her, Prudence found she could not send him away, could not extinguish the light in his eyes, could not reject the hand he extended to help her into the carriage. They drove to Hyde Park through streets washed clean by overnight rain, London glittering in morning sun like a city remade. William pointed out landmarks, shared stories about his childhood in the city, asked questions about her own history with genuine interest. By the time they entered the park, Prudence had almost forgotten to be anxious about the spectacle they would create. The promenade hour had already commenced, the wide carriage path filled with London's elite taking air, and more importantly, seeing and being seen. Prudence recognized dozens of faces, society matrons she had served for 3 years, young ladies who had ignored her at countless balls, gentlemen who had looked through her as if she were transparent. Now, seated beside the Marquess of Aldridge in his elegant barouche, she was suddenly, devastatingly visible. The first to notice was Lady Vivian Ashcroft, holding court from her own carriage surrounded by sycophants. Her lovely face went through a series of expressions as she processed the impossible sight, shock, confusion, and finally, malicious delight. "Lord Aldridge," she called out as they passed, her voice carrying with calculated clarity, "what an unexpected companion you have chosen for your morning drive. I was not aware you were acquainted with Lady Fairmont's useful creature." The insult landed with surgical precision. Useful creature. As if Prudence were more object than person, a tool to be employed rather than a human being deserving of courtesy. William stopped the carriage. Prudence's heart sank as she prepared for him to make excuses, to distance himself from her, to recognize the social cost of this association. Instead, he turned to Lady Vivian with an expression of such cold disdain that several onlookers gasped. "Miss Bellamy," he said clearly, "is a lady of remarkable intelligence, extensive education, and profound insight. I consider myself extraordinarily fortunate to enjoy her company and conversation. I wonder if you might say the same of your companions, Lady Vivian, though perhaps meaningful conversation is not what you seek in your associations." The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Vivian's face flushed crimson, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Around them, dozens of witnesses absorbed every word, already composing the story they would spread through drawing rooms that afternoon. William flicked the reins, moving them past the stunned group before anyone could respond. Prudence sat frozen, equally shocked by his public defense, and certain that he had just destroyed his social standing for someone who could never adequately compensate him for the sacrifice. "You should not have done that," she whispered, once they were out of earshot. "Lady Vivian has tremendous influence. She will make you pay for that insult." "Lady Vivian," William said calmly, "is a cruel woman who derives pleasure from diminishing others. I have tolerated her spite for years out of social obligation. I find I no longer care to do so. And if defending you from her malice costs me invitations to tedious parties, I count myself fortunate in the exchange." "You do not understand," Prudence insisted, fighting panic. "Society operates on unspoken rules about who deserves respect and who does not. By defending me publicly, by suggesting I am your equal, you have violated those rules in a way they cannot forgive. You have made yourself vulnerable to exactly the sort of social destruction that ends political careers and closes doors permanently." William pulled the carriage to a stop in a quiet section of the park, away from the promenade path. He turned to face her fully, taking her gloved hands in his with gentle firmness. "Prudence," he said, and the sound of her given name on his lips sent warmth through her entire body. "I understand far better than you think. I have lived my entire life following society's unspoken rules. They told me to marry for alliance, so I wed a woman I barely knew and lived in miserable isolation. They told me children were my duty, so my wife died trying to give me an heir neither of us wanted. They tell me now to select another stranger, preferably young and biddable, and repeat the entire wretched cycle. I am 40 years old, and I am done following rules that have brought me nothing but emptiness." "But what you are doing," Prudence argued, even as her heart soared at his words, "is not simply breaking rules. You are challenging the entire foundation of how marriage and courtship function in our world. You are suggesting that companionship and intellectual connection matter more than youth and fertility. That is revolutionary, and society does not reward revolutionaries." "Perhaps not," William agreed, "but I have come to believe that genuine happiness is worth more than society's approval. And Prudence, when I am with you, when we talk, I feel something I have never felt before. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The sense that if I continue to know you, to discover you, to build something real with you, I might actually experience the partnership that marriage is supposed to provide." Prudence pulled her hands from his, needing distance to think clearly. "You speak of possibility," she said carefully, "but possibility is dangerous when reality intrudes. What happens when the novelty fades? When you remember I am 35, plain, unable to give you the family you need. When younger, prettier women catch your attention, and you realize what you sacrifice for a few weeks of interesting conversation. Then I will have proven myself as shallow as the society we both despise," William said quietly. "But I do not believe that will happen, Prudence, because what I feel when I am with you is not novelty or fascination with the unusual. It is recognition. The sense of finally meeting someone who sees the world as I do, who understands what I say and challenges it, rather than simply accepting. That is not fleeting attraction. That is the foundation of something lasting." A familiar carriage drew alongside them. Lady Fairmont, chaperoning as promised but at discreet distance, now approached with purpose in her expression. "I believe," she called out cheerfully, "that you have provided sufficient scandal for one morning. Prudence, dear, we are expected at the Marchioness of Linwood's at home this afternoon. Best we return to prepare. The reminder of normal routine helped Prudence regain her equilibrium. She allowed William to drive them back to Lady Fairmont's townhouse, acutely aware that every carriage they passed held witnesses to their unconventional courtship. By the time they arrived, she felt exhausted from the weight of so much sustained visibility. William helped her down from the carriage with obvious reluctance to part. "May I call again tomorrow?" he asked, ignoring Lady Fairmont's presence and the footman waiting to escort them inside. "Yes," Prudence heard herself say, despite every rational argument against it. "Though I cannot promise I will be fit company. This afternoon's social calls will undoubtedly be filled with questions I do not wish to answer. Then we shall spend tomorrow recovering from society's interrogation," William said with a smile that made her chest ache. "Perhaps a quieter activity. I have a rather extensive library that has seen little use since my wife's death. You would be welcome to explore it. Select whatever books interest you." The casual invitation to his home, to his private spaces, was a statement of trust that struck Prudence far more powerfully than grand romantic gestures might have. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and fled inside before she could do something foolish like cry in public view. Lady Fairmont followed at more measured pace, waiting until they were safely in the drawing room before speaking. "Well," she said, removing her gloves with deliberate care, "I believe we have established that the Marquess of Aldridge is either deeply serious about this courtship or courting social suicide, possibly both simultaneously. He does not understand what he has done," Prudence said, pacing the room with agitated energy. "Defending me to Lady Vivian, parading me through Hyde Park at the fashionable hour, inviting me to his home. Each act binds him more thoroughly to a course that will destroy his standing. Or," Lady Fairmont suggested mildly, "he understands perfectly well and has decided that his standing in a society he despises is worth less than the possibility of genuine partnership. That, my dear, would make him rather more admirable than suicidal." The afternoon's social calls proved as uncomfortable as Prudence had anticipated. The Marchioness of Linwood, a kind woman despite her elevated rank, struggled visibly with how to address Prudence's changed status. Was she still merely a companion, to be treated with polite indifference, or had the Marquess's public attention elevated her to someone deserving of direct conversation? Other callers showed no such hesitation. Lady Devereux, a society matron known for malicious gossip, arrived shortly after Prudence and Lady Fairmont and immediately opened her attack. "Lady Fairmont, I understand your companion has secured the attention of the Marquess of Aldridge," she said with false sweetness. "How remarkable. I wonder what particular talents she possesses that make her preferable to this season's lovely debutantes." The implication was clear and insulting. Prudence felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her expression carefully neutral, the mask of invisibility she had perfected over 17 years. Lady Fairmont, however, had no intention of allowing the insult to pass unchallenged. "Miss Bellamy possesses intelligence, wit, extensive education, and the ability to conduct meaningful conversation on topics beyond weather and fashion," she said crisply. "I imagine the Marquess finds those qualities refreshing after 6 weeks of vapid debutantes who have been trained to be decorative rather than interesting." The other callers absorbed this exchange with avid attention. Lady Devereux's smile grew brittle. "How progressive, though I wonder if the Marquess's family will share his enthusiasm for such an unconventional choice. The Cartwrights have always valued bloodlines and appropriate alliances." "The Marquess is 40 years old and head of his family," Lady Fairmont replied smoothly. "I suspect he neither requires nor seeks permission for his personal choices. But perhaps you might direct your concerns to him directly, rather than gossiping about him in drawing rooms." The barb landed effectively. Lady Devereux departed shortly after, already composing the story she would spread to 20 other drawing rooms before sunset. Prudence waited until all the callers had left before collapsing into a chair with an exhausted sigh. "It will only get worse," she said quietly. "Lady Devereux represents the moderate response. Lady Vivian will be far more creative in her cruelty." "Undoubtedly," Lady Fairmont agreed, settling beside her with tea that had grown cold during the social assault. "But you are not alone in this, Prudence. I have weathered worse storms than society gossip." And if the Marquess proves constant, which I believe he will, their censure will gradually transform into acceptance, or at minimum, into resigned acknowledgement that their disapproval changes nothing. Prudence wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that William's determination would outlast society's condemnation. But 17 years of invisibility had taught her that hope was dangerous, that believing led only to more devastating disappointment. Sarsama offered the proposal. The following 6 weeks tested that cynicism thoroughly. William called daily, exactly as promised, bringing books and botanical specimens, engaging in conversations that stretched hours without pause. He invited her to his library, where they spent afternoons surrounded by leather-bound volumes, debating philosophy and politics and poetry. William once mentioned his disagreement with a political pamphlet recently published, using their shared intellectual pursuit as the core focus. He took her driving through London's parks, ignoring whispers and pointed stares, treating her with respect that made casual observers question whether they had misjudged the plain spinster companion. But the campaign against their courtship intensified with equal determination. Lady Vivian employed every weapon in her considerable arsenal, spreading rumors that William had suffered mental collapse after his wife's death, that he was being manipulated by a cunning fortune hunter, that the entire association was elaborate revenge by Lady Fairmont against society for some ancient slight. The younger debutantes, seeing their quarry escape, turned their frustration toward Prudence directly. At a musicale 3 weeks into the courtship, Prudence found herself cornered by 3 lovely young ladies who made their feelings devastatingly clear. "I suppose we should congratulate you," Miss Caroline Huntington said, with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "You have accomplished what no one thought possible, capturing the Marquess despite having nothing to recommend you beyond willingness to engage his eccentricities. Though one wonders," Miss Sophronia Vaughan added, examining her nails with studied disinterest, "how long novelty can sustain a courtship. Men tire quickly of unusual diversions and return to appreciating classic beauty." The third, Miss Beatrice Sinclair, delivered the final blow with more directness. "He needs an heir, Miss Bellamy. You are 35 years old. Even if he marries you out of misguided infatuation, you will fail to give him children, and he will resent you for the remainder of your days together. Better to release him now before you waste his remaining fertile years." The words struck deep because they articulated Prudence's own fears. She had been counting the months since her last courses, worrying about declining fertility, dreading the moment when William would realize she offered him nothing but conversation and companionship when he needed dynasty and legacy. She excused herself from the musicale early, pleading headache, and returned to Lady Fairmont's townhouse. Her heart felt heavy, the insults having landed on the precise spot of her deepest insecurity. The familiar sorrow settled over her spirit. William called the following morning as usual, immediately sensing her distress despite her attempts to mask it. "What happened?" he demanded, abandoning all pretense of casual conversation. "You look as if you have not slept. And Lady Fairmont mentioned you left the Warrington musicale early, which is unlike you." Prudence considered lying, maintaining the pleasant facade that social interactions demanded. But their entire connection had been built on honesty shared in darkness. She owed him truth even when truth was painful. "I spoke with several young ladies last night," she said quietly. "Or rather, they spoke to me. They made certain observations about our courtship that I have been attempting to ignore, but perhaps should address directly." "What observations?" William's voice had gone cold in a way that suggested he could guess the content. "That I am 35 years old with declining prospects for successful childbearing," Prudence said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "That you need an heir to continue your family line. That regardless of how much you enjoy our conversations, practical realities will eventually make you resent me for failing to provide what your position requires." The silence that followed felt weighted. William stood, pacing to the window and back, with barely controlled agitation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried intensity that made her heart race. "I am going to say something that may shock you," he began, turning to face her fully. "Something I have not voiced to anyone, not even my brothers. I do not want more children. My wife died in childbed, Prudence, died in agony trying to give me an heir I did not particularly want with a woman I barely knew. I held her hand through 2 days of failed labor and watched life drain from her eyes while doctors assured me her sacrifice was necessary and honorable. I will never put another woman through that. Never. Prudence felt tears prick her eyes at the raw pain in his voice. Then why pursue remarriage at all? If you do not want children, if the succession is secure through your brothers, why subject yourself to society's expectations? Because I am lonely, William said simply, and the confession broke something in her chest. Because I live in a house filled with servants and obligations and endless empty rooms. Because I attend social events surrounded by hundreds of people and feel utterly alone. Because I want just once before I die to know what it feels like to share my life with someone who actually sees me as human rather than title. He crossed to her, kneeling before her chair with desperate intensity. Prudence, I do not need you to give me children. I need you to give me conversation, partnership, the sense that when I return home each evening, someone will be there who cares whether I had a good day or a terrible one. Someone who will argue with me when I am wrong, laugh at my poor attempts at humor, sit beside me reading while I work. That is what I want. That is what I have been seeking. And I found it with you. But society, Prudence whispered, even as hope began to kindle again. Your family, the expectations that come with your position, can all adjust to my actual desires rather than demanding I conform to their assumptions, William finished firmly. I am 40 years old and wealthy enough to weather their disapproval. More importantly, I am done living for others' expectations. If that means I remain unmarried because you cannot accept a proposal that offers companionship rather than dynasty, so be it. But I will not lie about what I want, and I will not pursue it with anyone other than you. Prudence stared at him, this man who had somehow seen past 17 years of invisibility to recognize her value. This man who knelt before her offering partnership instead of the transaction that marriage usually entailed. This man who spoke of loneliness and connection with raw honesty that made her previous isolation seem almost bearable by comparison. I do not know how to do this, she admitted, her voice breaking. I have spent so long being invisible, being useful, being nothing more than what others needed me to be. I do not know how to be seen, to be wanted, to matter to someone. Then we will learn together, William said gently, taking her hands in his. Because I confess I am equally inexperienced at genuine partnership. My first marriage taught me everything about duty and nothing about connection. We will make mistakes, stumble through this process of actually building something real rather than performing social rituals. But Prudence, I would rather stumble with you than waltz effortlessly with someone who makes me feel nothing. Lady Fairmont chose that moment to enter the drawing room, stopping short at the sight of the Marquess kneeling before her companion. A smile curved her lips, knowing and warm. I believe, she announced, that this conversation requires privacy. I shall be in the library should you need me, though I suspect you will not. She departed with uncharacteristic haste, leaving them alone in violation of every chaperoning rule she had established. Prudence realized with sudden clarity that Lady Fairmont had been engineering their privacy all along, creating space for genuine connection to develop despite propriety's restrictions. Will you marry me? William asked simply, still kneeling, still holding her hands. Not because you should, not because society expects it, but because you want partnership and conversation and someone to share your life with as much as I do. Prudence felt tears spill down her cheeks, 17 years of loneliness and resignation cracking open to make space for something new, something terrifying and precious and real. Yes, she whispered, then more strongly, yes, I will marry you. William's face transformed with joy so pure it made her breath catch. He pulled her down from the chair into an embrace that violated every rule of proper conduct and felt more right than anything in Prudence's entire life. They held each other while she cried and laughed simultaneously, mourning 17 years of invisibility and celebrating the beginning of something utterly unexpected. When they finally separated, both disheveled and improper, William reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Inside lay a ring unlike anything Prudence had seen in her years observing society engagements. Not the expected diamond solitaire, but a deep green emerald surrounded by seed pearls in an antique setting. "This was my grandmother's," William explained, sliding it onto her finger where it fit perfectly. "She was, by all accounts, a rather remarkable woman who married for love against her family's wishes. She and my grandfather built one of the great partnerships of their generation, intellectual equals, who wrote papers on agricultural reform together and scandalized everyone by treating each other as actual partners rather than performing expected roles. I always thought if I married again I would want it to be with someone who reminded me of her." Prudence stared at the ring, at the weight of history and hope it represented. "What happened to them?" "They lived together happily for 43 years, raised 5 children, revolutionized estate management across 3 counties, and died within months of each other because neither could imagine existence without their partner," William said softly. "That is what I want, Prudence. Not heirs or alliances or social advancement. Just 43 years of genuine partnership with someone who makes me remember why being human is worthwhile." "I cannot promise 43 years, Prudence said, touching the ring with wondering fingers. "I am already 35. Mathematics suggests we have less time than that." "Then we shall make excellent use of whatever time we are granted," William replied, pulling her close again. "Starting now, starting today." They sat together in scandalous proximity, talking quietly about practical matters like wedding dates and living arrangements, and how to navigate the social storm that would follow their engagement announcement. Lady Fairmont eventually returned with tea and biscuits and the satisfied expression of a woman who had correctly assessed a situation from the beginning. "I suppose," she said dryly, settling into her chair, "that I must begin searching for a new companion. Though I warn you both, Prudence is irreplaceable, and you will find yourselves missing her organizational talents the moment you realize running a household requires more than good conversation." "I wondered," William said slowly, glancing between them, "if Lady Fairmont might consider relocating to Aldridge Manor. There is an entire wing that goes unused, and I suspect Prudence would benefit from having a friend and ally close by as she adjusts to her new position." Lady Fairmont's eyes widened in surprise. "You offer me a place in your household. That is remarkably generous, my lord, though unnecessary. I have managed quite well on my own these past 20 years. "It is not generosity," William said honestly. "It is selfishness. You have protected and valued Prudence when society dismissed her. You offered support when she needed it most. You are, I suspect, one of the few people in London whose company we genuinely enjoy. And as Prudence correctly notes, we are both rather inexperienced at building genuine partnerships. We could use wisdom from someone who has navigated society successfully while maintaining her integrity." Prudence felt warmth flood through her at his words. He was not simply marrying her and extracting her from Lady Fairmont's household. He was acknowledging the relationship she valued, making space for it to continue, recognizing that her happiness involved more than romantic connection. "If Lady Fairmont agrees," Prudence added hopefully, "I would treasure having you close. You have been more family to me these past 3 years than any blood relation. The thought of leaving you behind pains me almost as much as the wedding itself delights me." Lady Fairmont blinked rapidly, clearing her throat with obvious emotion. "Well," she said gruffly, "I suppose someone must ensure you do not make complete fools of yourselves, and my townhouse has grown rather tiresome. Country air might benefit my health. Yes, I accept your generous offer, Lord Aldridge, on the condition that you actually listen to my advice on occasion rather than simply tolerating my presence." "I solemnly swear," William said with matching gravity, "to listen attentively to all advice while reserving the right to ignore it when my judgment suggests otherwise." Lady Fairmont snorted. "That is the most honest promise I have ever heard from a man. You will do well together, I think. You are both practical romantics, a rare and valuable combination." They discussed logistics until afternoon faded into evening. William would announce their engagement at a carefully selected dinner party the following week, making their intentions clear to society before rumor could distort reality. The wedding would occur within 6 weeks, both of them too old and impatient to endure lengthy courtship once the decision was made. Lady Fairmont would relocate to Aldridge Manor immediately after the ceremony. establishing her presence before gossips could suggest impropriety. When William finally departed, extracting promises that Prudence would dine with him at his home the following evening, she felt exhausted and exhilarated simultaneously. Everything had changed so quickly, the careful walls of invisibility she had built crumbling under the weight of genuine connection. "Are you frightened?" Lady Fairmont asked gently once they were alone. "Terrified," Prudence admitted. "Everything I have believed about myself, about my worth, about my place in the world, has been wrong. That is rather disorienting, and the thought of public acknowledgement, of being seen by everyone who has overlooked me for 17 years, fills me with dread I cannot quite articulate." "The price of visibility is high," Lady Fairmont agreed. "But invisibility has its own costs, as you well know. You have paid them for years. Perhaps it is time to try a different currency." The Marchioness of Aldridge. The week leading to the dinner party was simultaneously the longest and shortest of Prudence's life. William called daily as promised, but now their time together carried additional weight of impending public declaration. He seemed entirely unconcerned by social consequences, treating their engagement as settled fact, requiring only administrative announcement. Prudence found herself less sanguine. She had agreed to marry him in the safe privacy of Lady Fairmont's drawing room, surrounded by people who already knew and accepted their connection. Public declaration would invite scrutiny, criticism, and social warfare from those who saw her elevation as personal insult. Lady Vivian, in particular, had not forgiven William's public defense of Prudence in Hyde Park. She waged steady campaign of whispered rumors, each more creative than the last. Prudence was a fortune hunter who had seduced the grief-addled Marquess. Or she was his late wife's cousin seeking revenge, or she had compromising information about his family that she was using for blackmail. The stories multiplied daily, each more absurd, yet somehow more damaging than the previous. "Let them talk," William said when Prudence expressed concern. "Within a month of our marriage, they will have moved on to some new scandal. Society has remarkably short attention span when denied the satisfaction of reaction." The dinner party, hosted by the Duke and Duchess of Hartfield, represented careful social calculation. The Hartfields commanded enough respect that their implicit approval would matter, but they were not so elevated that their gathering would be impossibly formal. William had chosen well, Prudence thought, as their carriage drew up before the elegant townhouse. "Ready?" he asked, extending his hand to help her down. "No," she admitted honestly, "but I suspect I never will be, so we might as well proceed." The dinner included 20 carefully selected guests, all influential within society, but not uniformly hostile to unconventional matches. William had clearly spent considerable effort on the guest list, balancing political allies with social arbiters in a way that maximized their chances of acceptance. They entered together, already breaking convention by arriving as a couple rather than meeting inside. Conversation died as they were announced, dozens of eyes assessing Prudence with new attention. She wore one of her better gowns, dove grey silk that Lady Fairmont insisted brought out her eyes, with her grandmother's pearls at throat and wrists. Not fashionable, not remarkable, but appropriate for a woman who would shortly become Marchioness. The Duchess of Hartfield approached them with warm smile that suggested William had prepared her in advance. "Lord Aldridge, Miss Bellamy, what a pleasure to have you both here this evening. Miss Bellamy, you must tell me about your work with Lady Fairmont. I have heard remarkable things about your organizational skills and breadth of knowledge." The kindness in her voice nearly undid Prudence completely. She managed a polite response, acutely aware of the other guests circling like sharks scenting blood, waiting to see how this unconventional situation would unfold. William did not make them wait long. During the interval between dinner courses, he rose from his seat with the deliberate intention that immediately drew every eye. The dining room fell silent, cutlery stilling against china as society held its collective breath. "Your Graces, honored guests," William began, his voice carrying clearly through the elegant space. "I have asked you here this evening because you represent the people whose opinions I value most within our social sphere. You are friends, allies, and in some cases family. It seems appropriate to share with you first what will shortly become public knowledge." He turned to look directly at Prudence, seated several places down the table, his expression leaving no doubt about his feelings. "I have asked Miss Prudence Bellamy to become my wife. She has done me the extraordinary honor of accepting. We will marry in 6 weeks at St. George's, and I hope you will all attend to witness the beginning of what I anticipate will be a remarkable partnership." The silence following his announcement was absolute. Prudence saw shock, confusion, calculation flash across various faces as guests processed the implications. The air became brittle, every guest holding their breath. Lady Vivian, seated at the table's far end, looked as if she had swallowed poison. The younger debutantes present appeared torn between outrage and fascination. Then the Duke of Hartfield rose, raising his glass with decisive gesture. "To the Marquess and Miss Bellamy," he said firmly, his tone allowing no dissent. "May your union bring you both the happiness and partnership you deserve." It was endorsement clear and unmistakable from one of society's most respected figures. Others followed his lead with varying degrees of enthusiasm, raising their glasses, murmuring congratulations, accepting the fait accompli. William had created through sheer force of will and careful social positioning. Prudence rose from her seat, moving to stand beside William as custom dictated. He took her hand openly, the ring on her finger catching candlelight and announcing their commitment to anyone who had missed the verbal declaration. "Thank you," she said softly, meant only for him but carrying in the silence. "For all of this. For choosing me when you could have had anyone." "I could not have had anyone," William corrected gently. "I could have had beautiful women who bored me, advantageous matches that brought me misery, strategic alliances that left me lonelier than solitude. You were the only one who offered what I actually needed." The evening proceeded with surreal quality, guests approaching to offer congratulations that ranged from genuine to grudging. Lady Vivienne departed early, unable to maintain a gracious facade. The younger ladies formed a cluster in the corner, dissecting Prudence's appearance and speculating about what possible attraction she held for the Marquess. But several older women, matrons who had survived their own battles with society's expectations, approached Prudence with more warmth than she had received in 17 years. They spoke of their own difficult marriages, their struggles with social expectations, their relief at seeing someone challenge the system that had constrained them all. "You are braver than I was," the Duchess of Marlborough said quietly, catching Prudence during a lull in congratulations. "I married at 18 for duty, lived 40 years in miserable propriety, and now spend my widowhood wishing I had demanded genuine partnership rather than accepting what I was offered. Do not waste this opportunity, Miss Bellamy. Do not let their judgment make you small." The words stayed with Prudence as they departed the Hartfield townhouse hours later, William's hand steady at her back as they navigated steps to their waiting carriage. Inside the vehicle's private darkness, she finally allowed exhaustion to show. "That was," she began, then stopped, lacking words adequate to the experience. "Terrifying," William supplied. "Exhausting. Remarkably uncomfortable." "All of those things," Prudence agreed, "and also strangely liberating. For 17 years I have been invisible by necessity, making myself small to avoid exactly the sort of scrutiny we endured tonight. But now, having been seen, having survived their judgment, I find I am less frightened than expected." "You were magnificent," William said with quiet intensity. "You stood beside me with perfect dignity, deflected intrusive questions with grace, and made even our harshest critics acknowledge your right to be there. I have never been more proud or more certain that I made the correct choice." They rode in comfortable silence through London's nighttime streets, the city transformed by darkness into something mysterious and full of possibility. When they reached Lady Fairmont's townhouse, William escorted her to the door with proprietary care that would have scandalized observers 6 weeks earlier, but now seemed merely appropriate. "6 weeks," he said, holding both her hands at the threshold. "And then you will never have to return to this house except as guest, rather than resident. You will be Marchioness of Aldridge, mistress of your own household, partner in building the life we have both been seeking." 6 weeks, Prudence echoed, the reality of it striking her fully for the first time. "William, what if I fail? What if I cannot manage a great household, cannot navigate society as Marchioness? cannot be what you need me to be. Then we will fail together and adjust accordingly, William said simply. Prudence, I am not asking you to perform perfection. I am asking you to be human with me, to learn and stumble and discover how to build partnership without a clear model to follow. That is all either of us can offer, and it is enough. He kissed her forehead gently, a gesture of affection rather than passion, then departed into the night. Prudence watched his carriage disappear around the corner before entering the house, where Lady Fairmont waited with a knowing smile and hot chocolate. Well, the older woman asked, how do you feel now that society knows? Terrified, Prudence admitted, accepting the cup with grateful hands, and relieved, and more certain than ever that I am making the right choice, even if it is absolutely the wrong choice by every conventional measure. Lady Fairmont laughed, genuine amusement lighting her weathered face. That, my dear, is the description of every worthwhile decision I have ever made. Convention rarely accounts for actual human happiness. Sometimes the absolutely wrong choice is precisely correct. The 6 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of activity. William proved determined to involve Prudence in every aspect of their future life together, taking her to Aldridge Manor to discuss renovations, introducing her to his steward and housekeeper, soliciting her opinions on everything from staff management to agricultural policy. He treated her as partner rather than ornament, valuing her organizational skills and intellectual input in ways that made Prudence reassess what marriage could actually offer. But the social campaign against their union intensified in direct proportion to their obvious happiness. Lady Vivian, finding gossip insufficient, began writing letters to William's family members, emphasizing Prudence's unsuitability and suggesting William suffered from delayed, grief-induced madness. 3 weeks before the wedding, William's mother arrived in London unannounced, demanding a private audience with her eldest son. Prudence learned of the visit from Lady Fairmont, who had been monitoring the situation through her extensive social network. The Dowager Marchioness is quite displeased, Lady Fairmont reported with grim satisfaction. She had apparently selected the Sinclair girl as the appropriate bride, and is shocked to learn William rejected her choice in favor of a penniless spinster companion. Prudence felt cold dread settle in her stomach. Perhaps I should withdraw, she said quietly. Family approval matters, particularly for someone in William's position. I do not wish to create a permanent rift between him and his mother. Do not be foolish, Lady Fairmont said sharply. The Dowager Marchioness has controlled William's life for 40 years, selected his first wife disastrously, and seems determined to repeat her mistakes. He is finally claiming autonomy, and you would undermine that by retreating at the first sign of maternal disapproval. Before Prudence could respond, William himself arrived, his face dark with agitation as he swept into the drawing room without waiting to be announced. Forgive the intrusion, he said tightly, but I need to speak with Prudence immediately, in private if Lady Fairmont permits. Lady Fairmont rose without delay. I shall be in the library. Prudence, do not let him leave until you have established whether his mother requires me to challenge her to pistols at dawn. I'm quite an excellent shot. Despite her distress, Prudence smiled at the image of 70-year-old Lady Fairmont dueling the Dowager Marchioness. William waited until the door closed, then pulled Prudence into his arms with almost desperate intensity. My mother is a nightmare, he said into her hair, an absolute gorgon who believes she has the right to dictate every aspect of my existence because she gave birth to me 40 years ago. She arrived this morning with 3 hours of opinions about my poor judgment, my declining mental faculties, and your presumed gold-digging manipulation. William, Prudence said carefully, though her heart was breaking, if your family cannot accept me, perhaps we should reconsider. I do not want to be the cause of permanent estrangement. He pulled back, gripping her shoulders with gentle firmness. You are not the cause. My mother's need to control is the cause. Her inability to accept that I am an adult capable of making my own decisions is the cause. You are simply the occasion for a conflict that has been inevitable since I turned 18, and she could no longer dictate every aspect of my life. But surely there must be compromise, Prudence argued, even as she recognized the futility. Some way to honor her concerns while still pursuing our plans. The only compromise she will accept is complete capitulation, William said flatly. She wants me to marry the Sinclair girl, produce heirs through dutiful coupling with a woman I barely know, and repeat the exact pattern that made my first marriage so miserable. I will not do it, Prudence. Not for her. Not for anyone. I have already lived that life once, and I barely survived it emotionally intact. Prudence studied his face, seeing genuine pain beneath the anger. What did you tell her? The truth, William said simply. That I am deeply devoted to Miss Bellamy. That I intend to marry you regardless of her approval. That she can choose to attend the wedding and welcome you into the family, or she can choose to absent herself and accept the consequences of that decision. But that I am 40 years old and done allowing her to dictate my happiness. Prudence's breath caught on the phrase, spoken so casually, yet carrying such weight. You are devoted to me, she whispered, needing confirmation she had heard correctly. Of course I am devoted to you, William said as if it were obvious. Did you think I would upend my entire life, defy society's expectations, and publicly declare my intentions for someone I merely found convenient? Prudence, I fell in love with you during that first conversation in the conservatory, when you spoke honestly about invisibility and observation and the cost of genuine seeing. Every day since has only deepened that feeling. But I am not what men love, Prudence protested, old wounds suddenly raw. I am plain and aging and entirely unsuitable for a Marquess. Love is what beautiful young girls inspire, not what spinster companions merit. William took her face between his hands with infinite gentleness. Then perhaps men have been loving the wrong things, he said softly, because I find you beautiful in ways that matter. Your mind captivates me. Your honesty challenges me. Your resilience after 17 years of invisibility awes me. You are precisely what I have been seeking all my life, without knowing such partnership was possible. That is love, Prudence. Not infatuation with a pretty face that will age, but genuine appreciation for the person you are. Prudence felt tears spill down her cheeks, 17 years of believing herself unlovable cracking open to make space for impossible possibility. I love you too, she whispered, the words simultaneously terrifying and liberating. I tried not to, tried to maintain distance and perspective, but you made it impossible. You see me, William. Actually see me. How could I not love someone who gives me that gift? They kissed then, properly for the first time, with passion that made Prudence understand why society insisted on chaperones and propriety. When they finally separated, both breathing unsteadily, William rested his forehead against hers with a shaky laugh. 6 weeks suddenly seems remarkably long, he said. I may not survive the wait. You will survive, Prudence assured him, though her own body was arguing for immediate gratification. We both will, and when we marry it will be with a clear understanding of what we are choosing and why. Lady Fairmont discreetly knocked before entering, her expression suggesting she knew exactly what had transpired in her drawing room. I take it the Dowager Marchioness will not be attending the wedding, she asked dryly. Correct, William confirmed, making no effort to step away from Prudence. Mother has made her position clear, and I have made mine equally clear. We will proceed as planned, and she can choose whether to reconcile after the fact or remain stubbornly disapproving. I no longer care which she selects. Good, Lady Fairmont said with satisfaction. Maternal approval is vastly overrated, particularly when mothers have proven themselves poor judges of their children's needs. Now, shall we discuss practical matters? I have been reviewing the guest list for the wedding, and I believe we should consider expanding it to include more of the younger set. Let them see that unconventional matches can succeed spectacularly. The remainder of the engagement period passed in a whirl of preparations. William spent lavishly on Prudence's wedding trousseau, over her protests that such expense was unnecessary. He commissioned an artist to paint her portrait for the gallery at Aldridge Manor, insisting that future generations should know what the Marchioness who revolutionized their family actually looked like. I am not revolutionizing anything, Prudence protested during one sitting, uncomfortable with both the artist's attention and William's grandiose claims. I am simply marrying you. You are teaching me that love matters more than duty, William corrected, watching the portrait take shape. That intellectual partnership can form the foundation of marriage rather than being afterthought. That age and appearance matter far less than character and compatibility. If that is not revolutionary, I do not know what is. The wedding day arrived with astonishing speed, London blessed with unseasonable sunshine that made the morning feel auspicious. Prudence woke in Lady Fairmont's townhouse for the final time, surrounded by the modest room that had been her sanctuary for 3 years. Lady Fairmont sat on the bed while the maid arranged Prudence's hair, offering quiet counsel. "You are about to walk into a church filled with people who have dismissed you for 17 years, she said calmly. "Some will be genuinely happy for you. Others will be seething with envy or disapproval. All of them will be judging whether you deserve what you have somehow secured. How do you feel?" "Terrified," Prudence admitted, watching her reflection transform as the maid worked. "And determined. And more certain than I have ever been of anything that I am making the right choice, regardless of what they think." "Good," Lady Fairmont said, squeezing her hand. "Then you are ready. Remember, child, that their judgment cannot take away what you and William have built. They can whisper and criticize and predict disaster, but only you two determine whether this marriage succeeds. Focus on him, on what you are creating together, and let the rest fade into irrelevant noise." The dress William had commissioned was exquisite, cream silk with delicate embroidery that caught light with every movement. Not the debutante white Prudence had once dreamed of wearing, but something better suited to a woman who had waited 35 years to be seen. The emerald ring on her finger would shortly be joined by a wedding band William had designed to match, a continuous circle of gold etched with botanical patterns that referenced their first conversation. They departed for St. George's, Hanover Square in Lady Fairmont's carriage, crowds already gathering outside the fashionable church. Prudence saw curiosity on their faces, speculation about the infamous spinster who had somehow captured a Marquess. She lifted her chin, remembering William's words about visibility and courage, and entered the church with as much dignity as she could summon. The pews were full, exactly as William had intended. He had invited everyone, refusing to exclude critics or skeptics, making this wedding a public statement about the validity of their choice. As Prudence walked down the aisle on the Duke of Hertfield's arm, a borrowed symbol of familial approval, she saw tears on some faces and scowls on others, but mostly she saw William standing at the altar with an expression of such joy that everything else faded into insignificance. The ceremony passed in a blur of traditional words, given new meaning by the couple speaking them. When William took her hand to slide on the wedding band, he whispered words meant only for her. "Thank you for being brave enough to choose this. To choose me, to choose us." "Thank you for seeing me," Prudence whispered back, voice thick with tears. "For making me believe I was worth choosing." They emerged from St. George's as husband and wife, greeted by cheering crowds and a few scattered boos from those still convinced this match was scandal rather than romance. William handed her into his carriage with proprietary care, then climbed in beside her as the driver started toward Aldridge House for the wedding breakfast. "How does it feel?" he asked, pulling her close despite the broad daylight and watching eyes, "to be Marchioness of Aldridge?" "Unreal," Prudence admitted, leaning into his warmth. "Terrifying, wonderful, all of those things simultaneously. Ask me again in a year once I have had time to adjust to visibility." "In a year," William said, kissing her temple, "I intend to ask you if you are happy. That is all I care about, Prudence. Not whether society approves, not whether my mother reconciles, not whether we have produced heirs or maintained social standing, just whether you are happy." Prudence turned to face him fully, seeing her own reflection in his eyes. For the first time in 35 years, she saw someone valuable looking back, someone worthy of love and partnership, and all the impossible things she had stopped believing she deserved. "I am happy," she said simply. "For the first time in 17 years, I am genuinely happy. And I intend to fight for that happiness every day, regardless of what society thinks." "Then we shall fight together," William said, sealing the promise with a kiss that suggested their wedding night would more than compensate for 6 weeks of restrained courtship. 3 years later, Prudence stood in the library at Aldridge Manor, reviewing the final proofs of her essay collection on the experiences of unmarried women in English society. The project had begun as a private journal and was about to be published as a scholarly analysis under her own name with William's enthusiastic support. "Are you certain about this?" she asked William for perhaps the 100th time as he entered carrying their 2-year-old son Thomas, who had inherited his father's dark eyes and his mother's fierce determination. "Publication means renewed attention, possibly renewed criticism about our marriage and my unsuitability." "Let them criticize," William said cheerfully, setting Thomas down to toddle toward his mother. "Your work is brilliant, important, and deserves a wide audience, and anyone who still questions our marriage after 3 years of obvious happiness is willfully blind to reality." The existence of their son, born despite her age, further silenced many critics. "He is right, you know," Lady Fairmont called from her customary chair by the fire. "The book will be enormously successful and help countless women understand they are not failures for remaining unmarried. That is worth any amount of social disapproval." 3 years of living at Aldridge Manor had been kind to Lady Fairmont. She had established herself as an unofficial advisor to both William and Prudence, her sharp wit and social expertise invaluable as they navigated the complexities of their unconventional union. She had also become Thomas's most devoted admirer, spending hours reading to him and teaching him proper behavior with infinite patience. A knock at the library door announced the butler with the afternoon post. Among the letters was one bearing the Dowager Marchioness's seal. Prudence tensed, memories of that terrible confrontation 3 years earlier still raw. William took the letter with a resigned expression, breaking the seal and reading quickly. "Mother wishes to visit," he announced, surprise evident in his voice. "She says she has heard about your forthcoming book and would like to discuss it with you. She also includes a somewhat belated apology for her behavior surrounding our marriage." Prudence met his eyes, seeing her own mixed feelings reflected back. "Do you want her to visit?" "I do not know," William admitted. "Part of me remains angry about her treatment of you, her assumption that she could dictate my life. But she is my mother, and I suppose I would prefer reconciliation to permanent estrangement, if it can be achieved honestly." "Then invite her," Prudence said decisively. "But make clear that she comes as guest, not as authority figure, that she will meet me as I am, Marchioness of Aldridge and your partner, not as someone seeking her approval or permission to exist." William's eyes gleamed with fierce pride. "Have I mentioned recently that I love you?" "Not in at least 3 hours," Prudence replied with the ease of long companionship. "You are becoming quite neglectful." "Then allow me to remedy that," William said, crossing to pull her close despite Thomas's protests at being squished between them. "I love you, Marchioness, for your brilliant mind, your fierce courage, your determination to remain authentic despite all pressure to conform. You are precisely what I needed, even when I did not know such partnership was possible. And you," Prudence said softly, touching his cheek with her free hand, "gave me visibility when I had accepted invisibility as a permanent condition. You taught me that being seen is worth the risk, that love can be built on a foundation of genuine partnership rather than social transaction. I will spend the rest of our lives being grateful for that gift." Thomas, tired of being ignored, demanded attention with increasing volume. They separated with mutual laughter, returning to the comfortable chaos of family life. Later that evening, after Thomas was asleep and Lady Fairmont had retired to her wing, William and Prudence sat in the library reading, as was their custom, companionable silence punctuated by occasional observations about their respective books. "I have been thinking," William said during one such pause, "about what society said when we married, that I was mad, that you were a fortune hunter, that our marriage would crumble within a year. I wonder what they say now." "Probably that we are eccentric but harmless," Prudence suggested, setting aside her book. "That our continued happiness is an anomaly rather than evidence that their rules might be flawed. People rarely admit they were wrong about fundamental beliefs. Easier to dismiss contradictory evidence as exception." "Let them dismiss us," William said, reaching for her hand. "We know the truth. That genuine partnership built on mutual respect and intellectual compatibility provides a stronger foundation than all the strategic alliances in England. That is enough." "More than enough," Prudence agreed, squeezing his fingers. "It is everything." They returned to their reading, two people who had found each other against all probability, who had built something real from the rubble of society's broken promises. Outside, London's aristocratic world continued its endless rounds of strategic marriages and dutiful couplings. But inside Aldridge Manor, in a library filled with books and firelight and the quiet breathing of genuine partnership, two formerly invisible people had created their own world. A world where being seen mattered more than being beautiful, where conversation was valued over youth, where love was built on a foundation of minds meeting rather than faces attracting. And in that world they were not just surviving, they were thriving. Years later, when scholars studied the remarkable life of Prudence Bellamy Cartwright, Marchioness of Aldridge, they would point to her published works on women's experiences as her most significant contribution. But those who knew her best understood that her greatest achievement was simpler and more profound. She taught an entire generation that being invisible was not inevitable, that love could be built on partnership rather than transaction, and that choosing courage over convention sometimes led to happiness beyond imagination. The woman society dismissed at 18 and ignored for 17 years became one of the most influential voices of her generation, not because she was beautiful or young or born to appropriate station, but because she refused to remain invisible once someone finally took the time to truly see her. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories of love, resilience, and hope.